Hi, this is a story of a telephone call. Yeah, you know the old ringing sound? Ring. Perhaps it was the longest ring in the history of mankind. Too bad the Guinness Book of World Records representatives were not there to confirm it. Now, imagine the Northern Atlantic Ocean. It's so huge, so quiet and lazy. And somewhere among the cold waves there's a telephone tied to some kind of bobber float. And it rings without stop. The sound gets caught up in the air and spreads across the ocean. That call comes from under 60 meters deep water, and it's a collective plea of 28 desperate people that want to be rescued. It was a call that lasted 2 days. Yes, that's right, the whole 2 days. 28 lives depended on it. Alright, let's research this case in a bit more detail. In the beginning of the 20th century, the US government began making the S-series submarines. The total number of them was 36. It came as a fairly successful project considering the harsh realities of that time period. Some of those submarines even made it to the 40s, where they took part in the Second World War, involved into a military campaign near the Aleutian and Solomon Islands in the Pacific. What's interesting is that American engineers try to put spy planes on Model S. Here are a few rare photos that prove this really was their idea. These photos weren't made with an iPhone, you can tell. It's interesting that those photos made it so far. They were taken from the website dedicated to the US Submarine Lovers Association. So the S model had a deck from which the B plane would take off. It was the famous Martin MS-1. But the further experiments didn't show any positive outcome and therefore were terminated. The seamen made a few photos alongside the machine, and it has become a part of history. The submarine we're talking about was the number 5 in S-series. It was launched in 1990, and by the 20th of August they began running tests. They started out in the northern part of Atlantic, not far from Delaware. So it was a normal course of things everything was going at. The crew began to get used to the new equipment. Everything seemed to be in order. It was time for one last test, the emergency dive test. So, Charles Cook, the captain, ordered the team to immerse the boat. At that point, it is very important to remember to close the main vent line valve that serves the purpose of an oxygen pump. But it seems that the guy who was responsible for the valve got distracted. He probably was dreaming about getting back to the mainland for a cup of coffee. So the point was that he didn't close the valve. And then something terrible happened. The water started floating right into the submarine through all the cracks and openings. Before they managed to close all the valves, the submarine went down like a stone. Half full of water, it remained down at the bottom. The bow section and torpedoes got seriously damaged. It was full of water, totally sunk. The depth wasn't too deep, around 60 meters, but it wasn't helping much. It was technically impossible to send out a radio signal. There was simply too much water. The crew began to realize that no one will probably ever find them now. It was a remote and isolated place and there was no one around. It was real lucky that one of the crew members was really brainy. He was a very smart engineer, I think. Or maybe he was a radio operator or electrician. That doesn't matter. What matters is that he was smart, and so he found a cable, connected it to the phone, attached the phone to a bobber float of some sort, and sent it up. And so that's how the whole thing came about. There it was, the ringing telephone floating on the water surface. Just imagine the dead cold water and those thrilling, throbbing ringing sounds. How spooky is that? The telephone call, the ringing you might as well call "Please save our lives," was ringing and ringing and ringing. Then it rang some more. Then it did a little bit more ringing and started all over again. So it was a very long ring. Many hours straight it was ringing. And you know how the team members must have felt being trapped down there. Sheer minutes probably felt like hours to them. The biggest problem was that the area they sunk in was no much of a travel channel. So the only ones who could hear that telephone were seagulls and albatrosses. And so it was then when the Captain Cook made a very important and calculated decision. You'll never guess what he did. He decided to put the submarine apeak, vertically. He figured that because the depth was 60 meters and the submarine length was 70, it meant it will be enough to reach the water surface and the land. And that is definitely something. A somewhat bigger bobber float, that's for sure. So the idea was, without a doubt, very risque. But then again, it's the matter of life and death. It's the whole crew we're talking here. The main danger was the battery's acid electrolyte, which could spill and poison everyone with its deadly steam. The team trusted their captain. Also, there were no alternatives, so they couldn't say no. They all worked together as a true team of brave seamen, and all the tasks were assigned to everyone very accurately, and so there was nothing else left for them than to hope that everything will turn out alright. And then the captain goes and seals the deal by saying something very extraordinary, a command no Marine ever heard before in his life. He says, "Raise the fanny," or "Ahoy, let's go up with this back thing, let's get that stern and go up," or something like that. So, a few minutes later, the submarine was standing vertically. With a little bit of tilt, leaning on the land the valve guy was dreaming about when he forgot to close the damn thing. Can you even imagine what was happening at that very moment inside the sub? Tons of water thrashing and jolting back and forth, messing things up big time. And so all the guys, all the brave Marines were safe and sound. It was almost too late for all of them. So they all got around the stern area of the boat and thought how lucky they were to actually put the sub vertically. All while the telephone was ringing, scaring the hell out of seagulls and other birds for a good deal of 2 days. And so it was then that their pleas were heard. The big military Atlantis ship was passing them by. And it was so that the Atlantis watchman saw the sunken submarine and heard that repetitive telephone ring. He first thought that he was going insane. A couple of guys from Atlantis took a dinghy and came closer to the phone. They picked it up and said, "Hello, who is this?" The answer was, "We are the S5 submarine." The sailor was quite surprised and stunned by the fact that he was talking over the phone that stuck out of water. Without knowing what to say, he asked where the submarine was going. And he got a brilliant sharp reply, "Straight to hell." That day, angels and demons didn't get the chance to greet the 28 people they were expecting coming their way. The Atlantis crew screwed up their plans, we might say that. And so the day was saved. The last one to crawl out of the sub was of course the captain, Captain Cook. Later in his career, this brave man will become the commander of the Pennsylvania battleship. He will also survive the Pearl Harbor event. You know that time the Japanese took Americans by surprise? Eventually, Cook became an admiral and a very responsible figure in the US Navy. Everyone seemed to forget about that sub after the incident. It was too dark of a moment to keep in mind. but I'm pretty sure that the telephone is still out there somewhere, lying in someone's living room, reminding them about the good old days. I mean, the terrible old days when 28 people almost died in a horrific accident. So, how do you think they all got out of that boat? Well, the Atlantis crew had all kinds of stuff on board, and they quickly and accurately made a haul in the sub. 27 desperate men and their brave captain finally got out, and thank God for letting them live. Some time passed, and Ohio State tried to pull the submarine to the docks to fix it, but it seems like there was too much water inside. So the result of that idea came as the tow rope being eventually broken. The sub sank anyway. It almost feels like, in a way, that might have been something it always wanted, to lie peacefully on the bottom of the ocean, never bothering anyone or anything. Alright, well, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story of the miracle telephone call. Make sure you subscribe to Real Bizarre, stay tuned for more episodes, and I'll see you next time.